and you will notice that when we do the scribbling, I am going round in almost like a figure-8 position. Don't go side to side because it looks rubbish basically. Keep going round and round and round, as you can see here. Now as we build this up, as you can see, the more you go over something, the darker it becomes. So you can make this almost like ball shape here appear to be three-dimensional simply by building up the tone layer upon layer, and we keep doing it. Use a dip pen now, similar sort of effect, again scribbling round. Try to do it randomly. Make sure your wrist is moving and also your fingers are moving. Don't keep your hand very rigid, otherwise it doesn't work. Because don't forget, the lines need to look as random as possible. The more interesting you make the lines, the more interesting the video will become. Texture we are.
The scribble technique that he was using in that video is pretty much what we're going to be looking at today. So when I'm drawing with a scribble technique, one of the things that you want to make sure is that it's a continuous line on the paper, and whether you start that in pencil and then carry it over to pen is up to you. But sort of the harder you go and the more overlapping of lines, the more definition the illustrations will have. So we're going to combine that loose line illustration, and I'm going to show you some examples of loose line illustration and where you can end up going with it. So if you look at a couple of these, they really are, they're not only loose line illustration, they are often distorted images. So not so much these ones here, but if you move up to here, these ones of Frito Kahlo, what we're doing is we're really simplifying shapes and really distorting images. So if you look at like this cat, it's certainly not a good sketch of a cat. But to accomplish that, what I'm doing is I'm moving my hand up my pen, so it's almost at the top. So I'm almost using it like a clunky, it's almost like dragging a chopstick from the top down. It's very hard to control. But when you look at some of these images, it's a very easy way to do it. So you can see the guitar player is somewhat sophisticated, but very distorted. And then we're looking at some with color on the left-hand side. So again, some examples of some here. This is a really good example of a group of people. Let me just bring that one up. Well, actually, we'll go back to it. So here's some that are less loose line, but definitely on the side of naive, sort of chunky shapes, really basic shapes. So if you look at these faces over here, definitely, you know, sort of loose line, but also very naive. And these three people sort of holding this animal, same thing. And then here's some really good examples of of loose line, but also very naive, very kind of distorted figures, very simplified figures, so instead of trying to be realistic, you're simply trying to get sort of big, bold shapes and see how they sort of work out. So these are some good examples of what I want you to try and do. So really simplified, distorted shapes. I will send you a link to this Pinterest so you can study it a little bit. But yeah, this is sort of what we're up to today. you have your drawings, whether it's really scribbly or whether it's more distorted or simplified, remember to open it up into Photoshop. And once I have it in Photoshop, I'm going to duplicate my layer so that I have a background layer, but also have another layer. Oops, it's on my other screen. So we have another layer that we can work with. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjustments, brightness and contrast. I'm going to push the brightness up, and I've actually already done it on here, but pull your brightness up and that will get rid of the paper look underneath it. And the other way is to go adjustment levels. And levels, you can pull the black in a little bit, pull the white in a little bit, and that will also get rid of the white. So then we're going to save it as a PSD into a folder where where you know you can find it. Okay, change of plans. That was a lousy 5-minute drawing I did, so I brought in a different one. So basically, once I have it in here, I've gone up under opacity and I've changed it to multiply. So basically what that does is it makes it more see-through, so you see less tone. So if I bring it in at 100%, I can scale it down, but I really shouldn't be scaling it up if I was using 300 DPI. That's kind of a good rule for you guys to understand. Scan it, set it, or take your photograph, set the actual dimensions to 300 DPI. That will give you your 100% size. So as soon as you scale it up from that, the DPI goes down. So let's say if it's 300 DPI at 8.5 inches and you scale it up 200% to like 16 or 17 inches, then that DPI just went down half. So now you're down to 150. As soon as it hits about 100, you're going to be able to see the pixels when you print it, which is very important. I know that's a lot of blah, blah, blah. But so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my text back in. So we have a little bit more room to work with. Now that I've blown it up a little bit, I'm going to sort of go with my bolder headline. And all I'm doing now is I'm trying to set up my illustration. So I'll bring these just to the side so I can bring them back in. I could also make that a layer, which actually would be the proper thing to do. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to select all of my text. I'm going to go new layer. I'm just going to call it text. I'm going to go OK. And then I'm going to drag my blue dot onto that layer. And then while I'm working on the illustration, I can just turn off my text and that's fine. So the next thing I'm going to try and do is I'm just adding a little bit of color to this. So if you remember my story, it was one of the things was about getting stung with jellyfish. So I'm just blocking in some really rudimentary color. So the last thing you want to do is have perfect coloring on this type of illustration. So I've taken my Scribble drawings. I've actually used some type from my story that I've blown up, and that has become part of my collage. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to incorporate your illustration. You're going to take one paragraph of text and your numbers, and you're going to turn that into a stunning piece of art. So what you can see here is sort of two different approaches using the same illustration. So this one, having the illustration much bigger, using some blocks of color to point out the jellyfish, taking the actual text from my jellyfish and layering it on there. In this case, the only thing that really has to be legible for you guys is your title. So mine is Destin for Destin, the little introduction paragraph, and some stats. So you don't have to have the whole story in there, but you can use the story as part of the layout. So you can sort of see two very different approaches, one very colorful with the text sitting on top of the illustration, and then one where the illustration is much smaller and much more white space around the illustration. So we'll just zoom in a little bit. So you can see the first one. using some type, and then the second one sort of again using little bits of type as collage. And yeah, that's basically what we're going to do today.